The sun hit the glass facade of the downtown Atlanta skyscraper like a blade, splitting the morning into sharp angles of light and shadow. Heat rose from the pavement in visible waves, distorting the edges of parked cars and fire hydrants along Peachtree Street. It was not yet 9 in the morning, but the temperature had already climbed past 80 degrees, and the air carried that particular stillness that precedes the chaos of a city waking up to its own rhythm. Robert Garrison stepped out of his unmarked sedan and adjusted his tie. 62 years old, silver hair cropped military short, shoulders still broad beneath his charcoal suit. He had been chief of police for 11 years, and in 2 hours he would take the stand in the trial that could dismantle the Marchetti organization once and for all. 17 months of surveillance, wiretaps, undercover operations, and 3 dead officers had led to this moment. The prosecution had built its case on financial records, testimony from lower-level enforcers who had flipped, and one crucial piece of evidence that Garrison himself had secured during a raid on a warehouse in Buckhead. He was the linchpin. Without his testimony, the defense would have room to maneuver. With it, Vincent Marchetti would spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. Garrison looked up and down the street. He had told no one where he was going, not his security detail, not his assistant, not even his wife. He had simply driven here to this small diner on the corner of Peachtree and Baker because he needed 15 minutes of silence before the storm. The diner was called Rosie's, a relic from another era, with a faded awning and a neon sign that had not been lit in years. He had eaten here once, decades ago, when he was still a patrol officer. The coffee had been terrible. He suspected it still was. He pushed through the door, and the bell above it chimed softly. The interior was narrow, a long counter with red vinyl stools on one side and a row of booths with cracked leather seats on the other. A ceiling fan rotated slowly overhead, doing little to move the warm air. The smell of bacon grease and burnt toast hung in the atmosphere. There were only 3 other customers: an elderly man reading a newspaper at the far end of the counter, a young couple in one of the booths speaking in hushed tones over plates of eggs, and a construction worker in an orange vest drinking coffee near the register. Garrison chose a booth near the window, sliding onto the seat with his back to the wall. Old habits. He could see the entrance, the counter, the kitchen door, and through the window his car parked across the street. He placed his hands flat on the table and exhaled slowly. 2 hours. Just 2 hours, and then he would say the words that would put Marchetti away forever. The waitress appeared at his side. She was young, mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that suggested she had been working since before dawn. Her name tag read Eleanor. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her notepad, and Garrison noticed immediately. He had spent 4 decades reading people, and this woman was afraid of something, not of him, of something else. "Coffee," he said. "Black." She nodded quickly and walked back toward the counter. Garrison watched her go, noting the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she glanced toward the kitchen door, as if expecting someone to emerge from it. His instincts prickled, but he pushed the sensation aside. He was being paranoid. The trial had everyone on edge, himself included. He pulled out his phone and checked his messages. Nothing urgent. His security detail would be waiting at the courthouse. The district attorney had confirmed the schedule. Everything was in place. Elena returned with his coffee, setting the cup down with a hand that still trembled. As she did, the bell above the door chimed again. Garrison looked up and saw a man enter, tall, lean, wearing a dark suit that was too expensive for this neighborhood. He had the look of someone who belonged in a boardroom, not a run-down diner on Baker Street. The man walked to the counter, sat down 2 stools from the construction worker, and placed a white envelope on the surface in front of him. He did not order anything. He simply sat there staring straight ahead. Garrison felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He had seen envelopes like that before. Payoffs, bribes, instructions. The man in the suit glanced toward the kitchen, then toward Elena, who was standing frozen behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hand. Something passed between them. A look, a signal. And then the man slid the envelope toward her, stood up, and walked out of the diner without a word. Elena stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then she picked it up, opened it, and looked inside. Her face went pale. She turned toward the kitchen, then toward Garrison, then back toward the counter. She was calculating something, making a decision. Garrison could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the terror battling against something else. Something that looked almost like defiance. She walked toward his table. In her hand was a fresh cup of coffee. She set it down in front of him, picked up the cup she had brought moments earlier, and carried it away without a word. Garrison watched her disappear through the kitchen door. He looked down at the new cup, then at the door through which she had vanished. Then at the street outside, where the man in the suit was climbing into a black sedan with tinted windows. He did not drink the coffee. He understood, with the cold clarity that comes from decades of experience, exactly what had just happened. Someone had paid the waitress to poison him. And she had refused. She had switched the cups, taken the poisoned one away, and saved his life. She had done it silently, without warning him, without causing a scene, without giving any indication to whoever might be watching that she had betrayed her instructions. And now she was gone. Garrison pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Get me Lieutenant Collins," he said. "Now, across the city, in the concrete yard behind the Atlanta Police Department K-9 training facility, Sarah Collins was running drills with Max. The morning sun blazed overhead, and the heat was already oppressive, but neither of them showed any sign of slowing down. Sarah moved with the precision of someone who had spent years honing her body into an instrument of controlled power. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes tracked every movement Max made as he worked through the obstacle course. Max cleared the A-frame with effortless grace, his lean body stretching through the air before landing on the far side without breaking stride. He was 7 years old, in the prime of his working life, and his reputation within the K-9 unit was legendary. He had tracked fugitives through swamps, located missing children in collapsed buildings, and taken down armed suspects with a speed that left even veteran officers shaking their heads in disbelief. But what made Max truly exceptional was not his physical abilities. It was his intelligence, his instinct. The way he seemed to understand situations before they fully developed, anticipating threats and opportunities with an almost supernatural awareness. "Good boy," Sarah called out as Max completed the course and circled back toward her. He sat at her feet, tongue lolling, eyes bright with the satisfaction of a job well done. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, and he leaned into her touch with a soft whine of pleasure. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw the caller ID, Chief Garrison. She answered immediately. "Collins. Lieutenant, I need you at a location downtown, Rosie's Diner, corner of Peachtree and Baker. Get here now. Bring Max. Do not tell anyone where you are going or why." The line went dead before she could respond. Sarah stared at the phone for a moment, then looked down at Max. He was watching her, his ears perked forward, sensing the shift in her demeanor. She did not know what was happening, but she knew the tone in Garrison's voice. Something had gone very wrong. "Come on," she said. "We have work to do." They reached the diner in 12 minutes, weaving through morning traffic with lights and sirens off. Sarah parked behind Garrison's sedan and stepped out into the heat, Max at her side. The chief was waiting on the sidewalk, his face set in hard lines that made him look older than his years. He gestured for her to follow him away from the diner toward a narrow alley between two buildings where they could speak without being observed. "Someone just tried to kill me," he said without preamble. "A waitress inside was paid to poison my coffee. She switched the cups instead. Saved my life." Then she disappeared through the kitchen. Sarah absorbed this information quickly, her mind already mapping the tactical implications. "Do we have an ID on the waitress?" Her name tag said Eleanor. "Young, dark hair, ponytail. I need you to find her before they do." "They," Sarah repeated. Garrison met her eyes. "This is connected to the Marchetti trial. It has to be. I testify in less than 2 hours. If they were willing to try something this brazen, they're desperate. And now that their plan failed, they're going to be looking for the woman who ruined it." Sarah nodded slowly. She understood the stakes. The waitress was not just a witness. She was a liability, a loose end, and organizations like the Marchettis did not leave loose ends. "I saw a man in a suit deliver an envelope to her," Garrison continued. "He left in a black sedan, tinted windows. I didn't get the plate, but someone in that kitchen knows something. Someone gave him access, told him when I would be here. This was planned, Collins. They knew exactly where I would be." "You told no one you were coming here?" "No one." Sarah felt the weight of that statement settle over her. If Garrison had told no one, then either he had been followed or there was a leak somewhere in his inner circle. Neither possibility was comforting. "I need you to find Elena," Garrison said. "Find her, protect her, and get her to testify about what she saw. She can identify the man who paid her. She can link this directly to whoever ordered the hit. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes, sir." "This stays quiet. No official channels, no radio traffic, no reports. Just you and Max. I trust you, Collins. I trust very few people right now, but I trust you." Sarah looked down at Max, who was standing alert at her side, his nose already twitching as he processed the scents in the air around them. She knew what Garrison was asking. A covert operation, off the books. No backup, no support, no safety net. Just her and her partner, hunting through a city of 500,000 people for one woman who might already be dead. "Well, find her," she said. Garrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a white napkin with a smear of lipstick on one corner. She was holding this when she brought my coffee. I palmed it when she switched the cups. It's not much, but it's something. Sarah took the bag and knelt down beside Max. She opened the seal and held it near his nose, letting him take in the scent. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, and then looked up at her with an intensity that told her he had locked onto the target. He knew. He would remember. "Find her," Sarah said softly. "Find Elena." Max turned toward the back of the diner, toward the alley that led to the kitchen entrance. His body went rigid, and then he was moving, pulling Sarah forward with the unstoppable force of a predator on the hunt. They rounded the corner of the building and found the kitchen door hanging open, a dumpster pushed aside, and a clear path leading toward the maze of service alleys that connected the blocks of downtown Atlanta. The chase had begun. Max moved through the alley with his nose close to the ground, processing thousands of scent particles with each breath. Sarah kept pace behind him, her hand resting on her service weapon, her eyes scanning the shadows for threats. The morning sun did not penetrate these narrow passages between buildings, and the air was thick with the smell of rotting garbage and exhaust fumes from the street beyond. But Max cut through the olfactory noise like a surgeon, isolating the single thread he needed and following it with unerring precision. They emerged onto a side street, lined with parked delivery trucks and loading docks. Max paused, his head lifting, testing the air. Then he turned left and accelerated, his paws striking the pavement in a steady rhythm. Sarah broke into a jog to keep up, her mind racing through the possibilities. If Eleanor had fled on foot, she could not have gone far. But if she had gotten into a car or been picked up by someone, the trail could end at any moment. Max stopped abruptly in front of a construction site, surrounded by chain-link fence. A gap in the fence had been pulled open, the metal bent back to create a passage just wide enough for a person to slip through. Max pushed through the gap without hesitation, and Sarah followed, ducking under the jagged edges of the wire. The construction site was a skeleton of steel beams and concrete foundations, a future office tower that had been abandoned mid-project when the developer ran out of money. Sarah had seen reports about this place: homeless encampments, drug deals, occasional acts of violence. Not a place anyone would choose to hide, unless they were truly desperate. Max navigated through the debris with practiced ease, his nose leading him toward a partially completed stairwell at the far end of the site. The stairs climbed into shadow, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she followed Max upward, her weapon now drawn and held at low ready. The air grew hotter as they climbed, trapped by the concrete and steel, and by the time they reached the third floor, she was sweating through her uniform. The floor was an open expanse of bare concrete, dotted with piles of construction materials and abandoned equipment. And there, crouched behind a stack of drywall sheets, was a young woman with dark hair and terrified eyes, Elena. Sarah holstered her weapon slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Police," she said. "Lieutenant Sarah Collins, Atlanta PD. I'm here to help you." The woman did not move. She stared at Sarah, then at Max, who had stopped a few feet away and was watching her with calm, assessing eyes. "How did you find me?" Elena whispered. "My partner," Sarah said, nodding toward Max. "He found your scent at the diner. He's very good at what he does." Elena looked at the dog again, and something shifted in her expression. Fear began to mix with something else. Hope, perhaps, or exhaustion so profound that it had burned away everything except the basic instinct to survive. "They told me they would kill my daughter," Elena said. Her voice cracked on the word. "My daughter is 4 years old. They have pictures of her school. They know where we live. They said if I didn't do what they asked, she would never come home." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was not just a contract killing. This was leverage, extortion. They had found a vulnerable woman and used her child as a weapon. "Where is your daughter now?" Sarah asked. "With my mother, in Decatur. I told her to take Sophia somewhere safe, but I don't know if she understood. I don't know if they got there in time. I don't know anything. I just ran. I did what you saw me do, and then I ran because I knew they would kill me for it, but I couldn't. I couldn't poison that man. I saw his eyes. He looked like my father. My father was a good man. He was a police officer in Guatemala before we came here. They killed him because he wouldn't take their money, and I thought, if I do this, I become the thing that killed my father. I become the monster. So I switched the cups, and I ran, and now they're going to kill my daughter, and it's all my fault." She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Sarah moved forward slowly and knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me," she said. "My name is Sarah. This is Max. We're going to protect you and your daughter. But I need you to tell me everything. Who approached you? What did they look like? What did they say?" Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "A man came into the diner 3 days ago. He said his name was Marco. He was polite, friendly. He said he knew people who could help my mother with her medical bills. My mother has cancer. We can't afford the treatment. He said if I did one small favor, all our problems would go away." "What did he look like?" "Older, maybe 50. Grey hair, very short, expensive clothes. He had a scar on his left hand between the thumb and finger, like a burn." Sarah filed this information away, her mind already connecting it to known associates of the Marchetti organization. "And the man who came in this morning, the one who left the envelope, different man, younger, black hair?" He didn't speak. He just put the envelope on the counter and looked at me. I knew what it meant. There was a picture of Sophia inside, a picture of her walking into her school, and a note. It said, "Do it now." Sarah understood the depth of the cruelty at work here. They had isolated their target, exploited her desperation, and used her child's life as collateral. It was a technique designed to ensure compliance and eliminate any possibility of betrayal. Except Elena had betrayed them anyway. She had looked into the eyes of a stranger and made a choice that could cost her everything. "You're very brave," Sarah said quietly. "What you did took courage, and I'm going to make sure your daughter is safe. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Elena looked at Max, who had settled onto his haunches and was watching her with eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should. Then she looked back at Sarah. "I trust him," she said, nodding toward the dog. "There is something in his eyes. Something honest." Sarah almost smiled. "That's because he is honest. He's the most honest partner I've ever had. Now come with me. We need to get you somewhere safe, and then we're going to find your daughter." They descended through the construction site and emerged into the blazing morning sun. Sarah kept Elena close, shielding her with her body as they moved through the alley toward the street where she had parked. Max ranged ahead, checking corners and testing the air for any sign of threats. They reached the car without incident, and Sarah ushered Eleanor into the back seat before climbing behind the wheel. "What's your mother's address?" she asked. Eleanor gave her the information, and Sarah punched it into her GPS. Decatur was a 15-minute drive under normal conditions, but she was not planning to drive normally. She pulled onto the street and accelerated, weaving through traffic with the skill of someone who had spent years in pursuit vehicles. As she drove, she called a number she had memorized long ago, a contact in the FBI who owed her a favor. "Martinez," she said when the line connected. "I need a favor. Off the books. Collins, this better be good. It's connected to Marchetti. I have a witness who can link him to an attempted murder of Chief Garrison, but she has a daughter, 4 years old. The daughter might be in danger. I need you to send someone to an address in Decatur. Quietly. No lights, no sirens, no paperwork." There was a pause on the line. "You're asking me to deploy federal resources without authorization. I'm asking you to save a little girl's life." Another pause, then a sigh. "Give me the address." Sarah relayed the information and ended the call. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Elena staring out the window, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. "My contact is sending someone," Sarah said. "They'll be there before us. Your daughter is going to be okay." Eleanor did not respond. She simply kept staring, as if she could see through the buildings and streets to the place where her daughter waited, unaware of the danger swirling around her like an approaching storm. They reached Decatur in 11 minutes. Sarah turned onto a residential street lined with small houses and mature trees. The kind of neighborhood where children played in front yards and neighbors knew each other's names. She spotted the address immediately. A modest bungalow with a chain-link fence and a tire swing hanging from an oak tree in the front yard. There was no black sedan with tinted windows, no men in expensive suits, just a quiet street on a hot morning. But parked at the curb was an unmarked grey SUV, and leaning against it was a woman in jeans and a blazer, her FBI credentials hanging from a lanyard around her neck. She straightened as Sarah pulled up and stepped out of the car. "Collins," the woman said with a nod. Agent Rivera. Martinez sent me." "Is the family inside?" "Yes. Grandmother and child. They're shaken up, but they're fine. I told them to stay put until you arrived." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash through her. She turned back to the car and opened the rear door. "Elena, your daughter is safe. She's inside with your mother. Do you want to see her?" Elena practically fell out of the car in her haste. She ran across the lawn, through the gate, up the porch steps, and through the front door without pausing. A moment later, Sarah heard a child's voice crying out, "Mama," and then the sound of sobbing, deep and raw and full of released terror. Sarah stood by the car, giving them privacy. Max pressed against her leg, and she reached down to stroke his head absently. Agent Rivera walked over to join her. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Sarah gave her a condensed version of the events at the diner. Rivera listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "If what you're saying is true," Rivera said when Sarah finished, "this is bigger than one attempted murder. Marchetti must be desperate to try something this bold. The trial starts today. Garrison's testimony is the keystone. If they failed to take him out, they'll try something else. They can't let him take that stand. I know. That's why I need to get Elena somewhere safe and then get back to the courthouse. Garrison needs protection. What about official channels?" Sarah shook her head. "Garrison thinks there's a leak. Someone knew exactly where he would be this morning, someone on the inside." Rivera absorbed this with a grimace. "That complicates things. Everything about this is complicated. But right now, my priority is making sure Elena and her family don't become collateral damage. Can you get them into protective custody? I can make some calls, but it's going to take time to set up a safe house, and time is something we don't have a lot of." Sarah thought for a moment, running through options. Her own apartment was too obvious. The precinct was out of the question if there was a leak. Hotels were risky because they required ID and credit cards, which could be traced. But there was one place that might work, a place no one would think to look. "I have an idea," she said, "but you're going to have to trust me." Rivera's eyes narrowed. "Why do I get the feeling I'm not going to like this?" "Probably because you won't. But it's the best option we have." 20 minutes later, Sarah was leading Elena, her mother Rosa, and 4-year-old Sophia through the back entrance of the Atlanta K-9 training facility. The building was a utilitarian concrete structure on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by fenced yards and obstacle courses where the department's working dogs trained. Most officers avoided it unless they had business there, which made it perfect for Sarah's purposes. She led the family to a small apartment attached to the rear of the building. It was meant for handlers who needed to stay overnight during training exercises or emergencies. A single bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchenette, and a living area with a worn couch and a television that had not been updated since the previous decade. It was not luxurious, but it was secure. The building had cameras, reinforced doors, and a direct line to the precinct's dispatch center. "Stay here," Sarah said. "Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone except me or Agent Rivera. There's food in the cabinets and water in the fridge. I know it's not comfortable, but it's safe." Rosa, a frail woman in her 60s with silver hair and the same dark eyes as her daughter, reached out and grasped Sarah's hand. "Thank you," she said in accented English. "You saved my Elena. You saved my Sophia. We will never forget." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Just keep each other safe. That's all the thanks I need." She knelt down to Sophia's level. The little girl had her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's eyes, and she was clutching a stuffed rabbit with a missing ear. She looked up at Sarah with the open curiosity of childhood, undimmed by the terror of the past hours. "Do you have a dog?" Sophia asked. Sarah smiled. "I do. His name is Max. Would you like to meet him?" Sophia's face lit up. "Can I?" Sarah looked at Elena, who nodded slowly. A moment later, Max padded into the room, his tail wagging gently. He approached Sophia with the careful delicacy he always showed around children, lowering his head so she could pet him without straining. "He's beautiful," Sophia breathed, running her small fingers through his fur. "Is he a police dog?" "He is. He's my partner. He helps me catch bad guys." "Does he bite?" "Only if he's protecting someone he loves. Otherwise, he's very gentle. See?" Max licked Sophia's hand, and she giggled with delight. For a moment, the tension in the room dissolved, replaced by the simple joy of a child and a dog discovering each other. Sarah watched them interact and felt something shift inside her. This was why she did this work. Not for the adrenaline or the accolades, but for moments like this, for the chance to stand between darkness and innocence and say no, not today. But the moment could not last. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the city, men with guns were hunting for Elena. Garrison was preparing to testify, and the Marchetti organization was running out of options. Sarah stood and caught Eleanor's eye. "I have to go. There's something I need to do before the trial starts, but Max will stay here with you." Elena looked startled. "Your dog has the best protection I can give you. He knows you're sent now. He knows Sophia. If anyone tries to get in here, hell no before they even reach the door, and he will not let anything happen to your daughter. I promise you that." She turned to Max and knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. She looked into his brown eyes, those intelligent, soulful eyes that had seen so much alongside her over the years. "Stay," she said quietly. "Protect them, Max. I need you to do this. Can you do that for me?" Max held her gaze for a long moment. Then he licked her cheek, turned, and padded back to Sophia's side, settling onto the floor beside her like a furry guardian angel. Sophia immediately curled up against him, her small body relaxing into his warmth. Sarah stood and walked to the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back at the family she had sworn to protect. Rosa, weathered by hardship but unbowed, Elena, terrified but brave, and Sophia, innocent and trusting, with her arms wrapped around a dog who would die before letting any harm come to her. "Stay safe," Sarah said. "I'll be back." She stepped outside, closed the door behind her, and heard the lock engage. Then she walked to her car, climbed behind the wheel, and headed toward the courthouse. The sun was higher now, burning away the last traces of morning shadow. Sarah drove with the windows down, letting the hot wind wash over her face, trying to clear her mind for what was coming. She did not know exactly what she would find at the courthouse, but she knew it would not be simple. The Marchetti organization had resources, connections, and a desperate need to silence Robert Garrison. They had already tried once and failed. They would try again. She pulled into the courthouse parking garage and found a spot near the elevator. The structure was busy, filled with lawyers and defendants and witnesses and all the other actors in the daily drama of the justice system. Sarah moved through the crowd, her badge visible on her belt, her hand never far from her weapon. The security checkpoint at the courthouse entrance was staffed by 2 officers she recognized. She nodded to them as she passed through the metal detector, and they waved her through without comment. The lobby beyond was a cathedral of marble and glass, voices echoing off the high ceiling, footsteps clicking on the polished floor. Sarah scanned the crowd, looking for anything out of place. She spotted Garrison immediately. He was standing near the entrance to courtroom 4, surrounded by 4 officers in tactical vests, his security detail. But as Sarah approached, she noticed something wrong. The officers were standing too casually. Their eyes were not moving, not scanning the crowd the way trained protective officers should. They were props, decoration, not protection. "Chief," Sarah said as she reached him, "we need to talk, privately." Garrison met her eyes, and she saw that he understood. He turned to the nearest officer. "Give us the room." The officer hesitated. "Sir, we have orders to," I said. "Give us the room. Now." The 4 officers exchanged glances, then moved away, forming a loose perimeter around the hallway. Garrison led Sarah to a small alcove behind a marble column, out of sight and earshot. "Did you find her?" he asked. "Yes. She's safe. Her family is safe. I have them in a secure location with my partner standing guard. Your dog? Max will protect them with his life. You can count on that." Garrison nodded slowly. "And the information? Did she tell you anything useful?" She described the man who recruited her. Older, gray hair, scar on his left hand, and the one who delivered the envelope this morning. Younger, black hair, expensive suit. She can identify them both. That matches the description of Marco Vieri, Garrison said. Marchetti's head of security. If we can tie him directly to this, we can bring down the whole organization. But that's not going to happen if I'm dead before I take the stand. Sarah glanced toward the officers standing at their perimeter. Chief, your security detail, I know. Garrison cut her off. I've been watching them. They've been with me for 2 weeks, ever since the trial started. But this morning, something changed. The way they talk, the way they look at each other. I don't trust them. Then we need to get you out of here. I can't leave. If I don't testify, Marchetti walks. 17 months of work, 3 dead officers. It all means nothing if I don't take that stand. Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She understood Garrison's determination. She understood the stakes, but she also understood that walking into that courtroom might be walking into a trap. Then let me stay with you, she said. Let me be your protection. You. Alone? I got here without anyone knowing. I found Elena when no one else could. I have contacts in the FBI who are working off the books to keep her safe. And right now, I'm the only person in this building you can trust completely. Let me do my job, Chief. Garrison studied her for a long moment. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of risks and rewards. Finally, he nodded. All right, Collins, you're my shadow. Don't leave my side. They walked together toward courtroom 4, passing the officers who had been serving as Garrison's detail. Sarah felt their eyes on her, assessing, calculating. She kept her expression neutral, her hand resting casually on her belt, her fingers inches from her weapon. The courtroom was already filling with spectators, lawyers, and press. Sarah guided Garrison to the witness preparation room, a small chamber behind the main courtroom where witnesses waited before being called to testify. She checked the room thoroughly, examining the windows, the vents, the single door that provided access. Stay here, she said. He'll be right outside. She stepped into the hallway and positioned herself beside the door, her back to the wall, her eyes scanning every face that passed. The minutes ticked by. Lawyers hurried past with files and briefcases. Court officers moved through the corridor directing traffic. And somewhere in the building, Sarah knew, men were planning the death of the man she had been charged to protect. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rivera. Update, safe house being arranged. ETA 2 hours. Family secure at your location. No movement from Marchetti Associates. Will advise if situation changes. Sarah typed a quick reply. Copy. Staying with Garrison, courtroom 4, situation uncertain. Keep me posted. She pocketed the phone and returned her attention to the hallway. A group of men in suits approached from the far end, walking with the confident stride of attorneys. But something about them was wrong. Their suits were too expensive. Their shoes were too polished, and their eyes were not looking at the courtroom doors. They were looking at her. Sarah's instincts fired. She reached for her weapon. But before she could draw, one of the men raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Lieutenant Collins, he said. Relax. We're with the FBI. Agent Martinez sent us. He produced credentials, holding them up for her inspection. The badge looked authentic. The photo matched the face, but Sarah did not lower her guard. Martinez didn't mention he was sending anyone else. Change of plans. He decided you could use some backup, given the circumstances. Sarah studied the man's face, searching for any sign of deception. He met her gaze steadily, his expression calm and professional, but something still felt wrong. It was too convenient, too well-timed. Wait here, she said. I'm going to verify. She pulled out her phone and dialed Martinez directly. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. Collins, Martinez said. I was just about to call you. Did you send additional agents to the courthouse? 3 men, suits, currently standing in front of me? There was a pause. No, I didn't send anyone. Rivera's coordinating from her end. That's it. Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked up at the 3 men, and she saw the exact moment they realized their cover was blown. The leader's expression shifted, his polished professionalism dropping away to reveal something cold and predatory beneath. She went for her gun. The hallway erupted into chaos. The first man lunged toward her, producing a knife from somewhere inside his jacket. Sarah sidestepped, drawing her weapon in a single fluid motion, and fired twice. The shots echoed through the corridor like thunderclaps, and the man crumpled to the floor. The second attacker came at her from the left, and she spun to meet him, but he was faster than she expected. He caught her wrist, forcing the gun away, and drove an elbow toward her face. Sarah ducked under the blow and drove her knee into his midsection. He doubled over, and she brought the butt of her weapon down on the back of his skull. He collapsed beside his companion. The third man had not attacked. Instead, he had produced a silenced pistol and was aiming it at the door to the witness preparation room. At Garrison. Sarah did not think. She simply acted. She threw herself between the gunman and the door, raising her weapon as she flew through the air. They fired simultaneously. His bullet grazed her shoulder, a line of fire that tore through fabric and flesh. Her bullet caught him in the chest. He staggered backward, his gun clattering to the floor, and then he fell. The hallway was suddenly silent. Sarah lay on the ground, her shoulder screaming with pain, her weapon still gripped in her blood-slicked hand. She forced herself upright, scanning for additional threats. There were none. 3 bodies. 3 attackers neutralized. She had done her job. The door to the witness preparation room opened, and Garrison emerged, his face pale with shock. "Collins," he breathed, "are you fine?" Sarah cut him off, climbing to her feet. She pressed her free hand against her wounded shoulder, feeling the warm pulse of blood between her fingers. "It's a graze." "Ill live. You just saved your life." "Yes. Now we're getting you to that courtroom. You're going to testify, and we're going to put Marchetti away. Understand?" Garrison stared at her for a moment, and then something shifted in his expression. The shock faded, replaced by a hard determination that matched her own. "Let's go," he said. They moved through the courthouse together, Sarah limping slightly but refusing to slow down. Court officers rushed to intercept them, alerted by the sound of gunfire, but Sarah flashed her badge and kept moving. The doors to courtroom 4 swung open, and they entered the chamber like soldiers returning from battle. The judge looked up from the bench, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm as he saw the blood on Sarah's uniform. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the pain radiating through her body, "there has been an attempt on the life of Chief Garrison. 3 armed men in the hallway. The threat has been neutralized. But this trial needs to proceed immediately, before anyone else can try." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Lawyers shouted, spectators gasped. The press section became a frenzy of clicking cameras and shouted questions. But the judge banged his gavel, calling for order, and slowly the room fell silent. "Chief Garrison," the judge said, "are you prepared to give your testimony?" Garrison looked at Sarah, then back at the judge. "I am, Your Honor." "Then take the stand." Sarah watched from the back of the courtroom as Garrison was sworn in and began to speak. She had positioned herself near the main entrance, her wounded shoulder bandaged hastily by a court medic, her weapon reloaded and ready. She did not expect another attack, not with the courtroom now crawling with officers and federal agents who had arrived in response to the shooting. But she was not taking any chances. Garrison's testimony was damning. He spoke for over 2 hours, detailing the evidence he had personally gathered, the surveillance operations he had overseen, the connections between Marchetti and a dozen unsolved murders spanning 2 decades. By the time he finished, the jury was pale-faced, and the defense attorneys looked as if they had been gut-punched. When Garrison finally stepped down from the stand, Sarah felt something release inside her. A tension she had been carrying since the moment she had first arrived at that diner on Peachtree Street. It was not over. Not yet. There would be more trials, more testimony, more work to be done. But the hardest part was finished. Garrison had spoken his truth, and nothing could unsay it now. She met him in the hallway outside the courtroom, where a phalanx of FBI agents had formed a protective ring around him. Martinez was there, along with Rivera, and their expressions told her that the situation was finally under control. "Elena," Sarah said. "Is she still secure?" "She's fine," Rivera replied. "Your dog hasn't moved from her daughter's side. We've got a safe house ready. We'll move them tonight." "Good." Sarah felt exhaustion beginning to creep into her bones. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain in her shoulder was becoming harder to ignore. "What about the men I shot?" "2 dead, 1 in critical condition," Martinez answered. "We're working to identify them, but preliminary indications suggest they're Marchetti operatives, hired guns from out of state." "So it was a coordinated attack?" "Yes, and you stopped it, single-handed, without backup." He shook his head slowly. "That's going to make for an interesting after-action report. I had backup." Sarah smiled despite herself. The best partner in the department. He just wasn't here for this part. Garrison stepped forward and placed a hand on her uninjured shoulder. "Collins, I owe you my life. Twice over today. I won't forget that. Just doing my job, Chief." "No." He shook his head. "You went above and beyond. You found Elena when anyone else would have failed. You kept her safe when the entire Marchetti organization was hunting for her. You stood between me and 3 armed killers and didn't flinch. That's not just doing your job, that's being a hero." Sarah did not know how to respond to that. She'd never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a cop who happened to have a very good partner and a stubborn refusal to let bad people win. But looking into Garrison's eyes, seeing the genuine gratitude there, she allowed herself to feel a moment of pride. "Get some rest, Collins," Garrison said. "You've earned it, and give Max a steak from me. He deserves it." Sarah smiled. "I'll do that, sir." She walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. The heat had not broken, and the air was still thick with humidity, but there was a breeze now, carrying the scent of coming rain. Sarah stood on the steps and looked out at the city, at the cars and buses and pedestrians going about their lives, unaware of how close they had come to something terrible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rivera, family en route to safe house. Max riding with them. Sophia refuses to let go of him. Sarah laughed softly and typed a reply. "Tell her she's got good taste in partners. See you tonight." She pocketed the phone and descended the steps, heading toward her car. There was still work to be done, paperwork to file, statements to give, wounds to have properly treated. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to simply be grateful. Grateful for the skills she had honed over years of training. Grateful for the partners, human and canine, who stood beside her. Grateful for the chance to make a difference in a world that so often seemed indifferent to justice. She climbed into her car and sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine, just breathing. The interior was hot from the afternoon sun, and she cracked the windows to let in the breeze. Her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, a persistent reminder of how close things had come. But she was alive. Garrison was alive. Elena and her family were safe. And somewhere, in a prison cell awaiting trial, Vincent Marchetti was learning that his empire was about to crumble. Sarah started the car and pulled out of the garage, heading toward the K9 facility, toward Max, toward the family she had saved, and the partner who had helped her save them. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And for the first time all day, Sarah allowed herself to relax. The drive took 20 minutes. She pulled into the facility lot, parked beside the unmarked FBI vehicle that had transported Eleanor and her family, and stepped out into the cooling evening air. The temperature had finally begun to drop, and there was a freshness to the breeze that promised relief from the oppressive heat. She walked around to the back entrance and knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and Rivera stood there, looking both exhausted and satisfied. Quite a day, Rivera said. You could say that. They walked inside together, and Sarah found the scene she had been hoping for. Rosa was in the kitchenette, preparing something that smelled like homemade tortillas. Elena was on the couch, Sophia asleep against her side, and Max was lying on the floor in front of them, his head resting on his paws, his eyes tracking Sarah as she entered the room. "Hey, partner," Sarah said softly. Max's tail thumped against the floor, but he did not get up. He was still on duty, still protecting his charges. Sarah knelt beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You did good," she murmured. "Real good." Max licked her hand, and she felt the familiar warmth of their bond wash through her. This was what mattered. Not the commendations or the headlines. This, the simple connection between a woman and her dog, forged through years of trust and loyalty and shared purpose. Elena looked up from the couch, careful not to wake Sophia. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You're the brave one," Sarah replied. "You could have done what they asked. No one would have blamed you, but you made a choice. You saved a man's life. That's something you'll carry with you forever." Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "My father would be proud. I'm sure he would be." Rosa emerged from the kitchenette, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You will stay for dinner?" she asked. "It is not much, but it is made with gratitude." Sarah looked at the family gathered in this small, humble room, at the little girl sleeping peacefully against her mother's side, at the grandmother who had survived cancer and exile and the threat of losing everything, at the young woman who had risked her life to do the right thing. "I'd be honored," Sarah said. They ate together as the sun finished its descent and the evening settled over Atlanta. Simple food, shared conversation, laughter that surprised them all. Max accepted scraps from Sophia's hand when she woke, and the little girl giggled at the feel of his rough tongue against her fingers. For a few hours, they were not cops and witnesses and refugees. They were just people, sharing a meal, grateful to be alive. Later that night, after the FBI had transported Elena and her family to their new safe house, Sarah drove home with Max beside her in the passenger seat. The city lights glittered through the windshield, and the radio played softly, something slow and melancholy that matched her mood. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, not moving. Max sensed her stillness and pressed his nose against her arm, a gentle inquiry. "I'm okay," she said, "just thinking." She thought about Garrison, who would sleep tonight knowing he had done his duty, about Elena, who had found courage she did not know she possessed, about Sophia, who would grow up without the shadow of violence that had threatened to consume her family, about all the small choices that had led to this moment, this outcome, this measure of justice in an unjust world. She thought about the men she had killed. It was never easy taking a life, even when the life belonged to someone who would have killed without hesitation. She would carry those deaths with her, add them to the weight she already bore. But she would not let them break her. She had done what was necessary. She had protected the innocent. That was all she could do. Max whined softly, and Sarah realized she had been sitting in the dark for too long. She opened the door and stepped out, and Max jumped down beside her, his tail wagging, his energy renewed by the cool night air. "Come on," she said. "Let's go inside. I think we both earned some rest." They walked to the front door together, and Sarah paused with her hand on the knob. She looked down at Max, at this remarkable creature who had been her partner for 5 years. He looked back at her with eyes that held no judgment, no expectation, just unconditional loyalty and trust. "I love you, Max," she said softly. "You know that, right?" Max's tail wagged harder, and he pressed against her leg, as close as he could get. She took that as a yes. They went inside, and Sarah closed the door behind them, shutting out the night and all its dangers. Tomorrow there would be more work, More cases, more villains to chase and innocents to protect. But tonight, there was only this: a woman and her dog, safe and warm, together. Sarah collapsed onto her couch and Max jumped up beside her, something she normally would not allow, but tonight chose to overlook. He curled up against her side, his warmth seeping into her tired muscles, and she rested her hand on his back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Good boy," she murmured. "Good boy." And in the silence of her home, with her partner beside her and the weight of the day finally lifting from her shoulders, Lieutenant Sarah Collins closed her eyes and slept. Morning came too quickly. Sarah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the coffee table, and she groaned as she reached for it, her wounded shoulder protesting the movement. Max lifted his head, alert and watchful, until he determined there was no threat and settled back down. The caller ID showed Garrison's office. Sarah answered. "Collins, Lieutenant." The voice belonged to Garrison's assistant, a brisk woman named Patricia, who had been with the department for 30 years. "The chief would like to see you in his office, at your earliest convenience." "Is everything okay?" "Better than okay. Hell, explain when you get here." Sarah ended the call and lay back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. Her shoulder throbbed, and her entire body ached with the kind of deep exhaustion that came from sustained stress and physical exertion. But duty called, and she had never been one to ignore it. She showered, dressed in a fresh uniform, and drove to the precinct with Max in the passenger seat. The morning was cooler than the previous day, clouds gathering on the horizon with the promise of afternoon thunderstorms. Sarah welcomed the change. She had had enough of blazing sun and oppressive heat. The precinct was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Officers nodded to her as she passed, their expressions ranging from respect to outright admiration. Word had spread about what had happened at the courthouse, and Sarah found herself the subject of whispered conversations and pointed looks. She ignored them all and made her way to Garrison's office. The chief was behind his desk, looking more rested than he had any right to be. He gestured for her to sit, and Max settled onto the floor beside her chair, his eyes never leaving Garrison's face. "Collins," Garrison began, "I want to start by saying thank you. Again, officially this time." "It's not necessary, sir." "I disagree. What you did yesterday went beyond the call of duty. You identified a threat that my own security team missed. You tracked down a witness that no one else could have found. You protected that witness and her family from one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the Southeast. And you personally neutralized 3 armed assassins who would have killed me if you hadn't been there." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That's not something I take lightly." Sarah did not know what to say, so she said nothing. "The FBI has taken over the Marchetti investigation," Garrison continued. "Based on Elena's testimony and the evidence recovered from the scene, they're preparing RICO charges that will bring down the entire organization. Marco Vieri was arrested this morning. He is already negotiating a deal." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. "Then it worked, all of it. And I have you to thank for that." Garrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "Which is why I'm promoting you. Sir, you've been a lieutenant for 3 years. You've earned your captaincy 10 times over. As of today, you're being promoted to captain of the K-9 division. Full authority over operations, training, and deployment." He smiled slightly. "I assume that meets with your approval." Sarah sat in stunned silence. Captain? She had never expected this, had never even considered it as a possibility. She was a field officer, a tracker, a handler. The idea of sitting behind a desk, managing budgets and schedules and personnel files, filled her with something close to dread. "Sir," she said slowly, "I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for an administrative role." Garrison nodded, as if he had expected this response. I thought you might say that, which is why I'm restructuring the position. You won't be chained to a desk. You'll still be in the field, still working with Max, still doing what you do best. But you'll also have the authority to shape the future of the K9 program, to train the next generation of handlers, to make decisions about how we deploy our most valuable assets. He gestured toward Max, including him. Sarah looked down at her partner, who was watching the exchange with quiet interest. She thought about what Garrison was offering, not just a promotion, but a chance to make a lasting difference, to take everything she had learned over the years and pass it on to others, to build something that would outlast her. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take all the time you need, but don't think too long. The department needs strong leaders, and you're one of the best we have." They spoke for a few more minutes about logistics and paperwork and the mundane details that always followed moments of crisis. Then Sarah excused herself and walked out into the precinct, Max at her side. She found herself drawn to the K9 yard, the concrete enclosure where she had been training Max just yesterday, before everything had changed. The sun was hidden behind clouds now, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. Sarah leaned against the fence and watched the other handlers work with their dogs, the familiar rhythms of command and response playing out across the yard. Max pressed against her leg, sensing her mood. She reached down and stroked his head, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of his skull. "What do you think, partner?" she asked. "Captain Collins has a nice ring to it." Max looked up at her, his eyes bright with intelligence and devotion. He did not speak, of course. He did not need to. His presence was answer enough. Sarah thought about the path that had brought her here, the years of training, the countless cases, the moments of triumph and failure that had shaped her into the officer she was today. She thought about Elena, somewhere in a safe house, beginning the long process of rebuilding her life. About Sophia, who would grow up knowing that there were people in the world who would fight for her. About Rosa, whose faith in humanity had been renewed by the actions of a stranger. She thought about all the cases yet to come, all the missing children and fugitive criminals and dark corners of the city that still needed to be illuminated. There was so much work left to do, so many people who needed help. And she was in a position to provide it, not just through her own efforts, but through the officers and dogs she could train and lead. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, Max, let's do it." Max's tail wagged, and Sarah felt a smile spreading across her face. It was a new chapter, a new challenge, but she was ready for it. She had Max by her side, and together there was nothing they could not face. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, splashing against the concrete and releasing the smell of wet earth into the air. Sarah tilted her face toward the sky and let the water wash over her, cleansing and cool. The storm was coming, but she did not fear it. She welcomed it. She was Captain Sarah Collins now, and she had work to do. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah threw herself into her new role with the same intensity she brought to everything, learning the administrative side of the job while refusing to abandon her fieldwork. She split her time between the office and the streets, between budget meetings and pursuit operations, finding a balance that allowed her to excel at both. Max remained her constant companion. He accompanied her to briefings and training sessions, serving as both partner and teaching aide. Young handlers learned from watching Sarah work with him, studying the subtle signals and cues that passed between them, the unspoken language that had been refined over years of partnership. Elena testified before a grand jury, her words adding another nail to the coffin of the Marchetti organization. Vincent Marchetti was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. Marco Vieri, in exchange for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence that would still see him spending the next 2 decades behind bars. The organization that had terrorized Atlanta for a generation was finally, definitively destroyed. Sarah received her official promotion in a ceremony attended by the mayor, the chief, and dozens of officers from across the department. She stood at attention while Garrison pinned the new insignia to her collar, and she felt a swell of pride that she had never quite experienced before. She had earned this. Every sacrifice, every risk, every moment of doubt and determination had led to this point. But even as she accepted the congratulations of her colleagues, her eyes kept drifting to Max, who was sitting patiently beside the podium, watching her with those intelligent brown eyes. He was the real hero, she knew. Without him, none of this would have been possible. After the ceremony, she took him to their favorite spot, a small park on the outskirts of the city where they had trained together countless times. The autumn leaves were falling now, carpeting the ground in shades of gold and crimson, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. Sarah threw a ball, and Max bounded after it, his body moving with the grace and power that had made him a legend in the K9 unit. He caught it in mid-air and raced back to her, tail wagging, eyes shining with joy. "Good boy," she said, kneeling to take the ball from his mouth. "Good boy." She hugged him then, wrapping her arms around his neck and burying her face in his fur. He was warm and solid and real, and she felt a surge of love so intense that it took her breath away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for being the best partner I could ever ask for." Max licked her cheek, his way of saying, "You're welcome," or maybe "I love you too," or maybe just "This is nice." "Can we stay like this forever?" Sarah laughed and stood up, brushing leaves from her uniform. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home." They walked back to the car together, woman and dog, captain and partner. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink, and Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not experienced in a very long time. There would be more cases, more challenges, more moments of danger and triumph. The work was never truly done, and she knew that. But right now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. She opened the car door, and Max jumped in, settling into his customary spot in the passenger seat. Sarah climbed behind the wheel and started the engine, pulling out onto the road that would take them home. The night was falling, soft and gentle, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah drove through the quiet streets, her partner beside her, and she thought about all the nights they had shared, all the dangers they had faced, all the lives they had saved. She thought about Elena, who had found the courage to do what was right, about Sophia, who had wrapped her arms around a police dog and found comfort in his warmth, about Garrison, who had trusted her when he had no reason to trust anyone. She thought about the future, stretching out before her like an unwritten book. There were pages yet to be filled, stories yet to be told, and she would face them all with Max at her side, as she always had, Captain Sarah Collins, K9 Max, partners. She smiled as the lights of the city fell away behind her and the road ahead opened up into darkness and possibility. They would be ready.